Good morning and happy Easter. My name is Paul, and I'm one of the pastors here at this church, and I want to welcome you here today. It's a day of great celebration, and in fact, just for a few seconds, can I invite you to stand, and will you welcome one another and turn to a neighbor and say, Happy Easter. I'm so glad that you are here today. Welcome someone here today. Again, happy Easter to you. We're so glad that you are here. I see some of you, you're decked out in some really nice clothes for Easter. You have photo booths here. My wife said to me, Paul, I'm dressing you today. We have our whole family. We're going pastel themes. We're ready for our family photo. I know some of you are too. It's a great day. Someone said to me, hey, you ready, Paul, for this weekend? It's like the Super Bowl for the Christian church. I'm like, I am. It's like the Super Bowl. It's a day of great celebration, and it's a great day of joy because Jesus Christ died and he rose again, and we celebrate that truth and the impact that it has on people's lives. You know, have you ever wondered why Easter falls on different days of the year? I mean, December, Christmas, always the 25th. Valentine's, February 14th. Birthday, obviously the same day of the same month for you, right? But why is Easter different? Now, I know some of you might know this, but it's because, and I was reading about it and found out, Easter always occurs on the first Sunday after the full moon of the spring equinox. You got that? And let me share with you a quote. It's from a book by Barbara Brown Taylor. And she has this great chapter on Easter and the resurrection. I'm going to quote her a couple of times for the next few minutes. But this is what she says as a way to segue into our message. Easter always falls on the first Sunday after the first full moon on or after the spring equinox. As complicated as that sounds, it makes ancient sense since it means Easter coincides with the greening of the earth. Christ is risen and the whole world comes to life. Sap rises in dormant trees, spring peepers start their peeping, and trumpet lilies spill their sweet smell on the air. The connection is a happy one, guaranteed to renew our faith in the creative power of God. I love that quote because Christianity says that woven into the very fabric of creation, God the Creator has designed to tell us a story that there's beauty from ashes, that there's new life, that there's new beginnings and hope, and that comes through the person of Jesus. God the Creator is the God, the Redeemer, who comes to bring resurrection and new life. And you know what? For some of you, what if that is exactly why God brought you here today? God brought you here this morning for that exact reason. What if today is a day of new beginnings for you? What if today is a day of no longer feeling stuck, but feeling the freedom to flourish and move forward in the next season and chapter of your life? What if today you walked into this place knowing about Jesus and walking out being transformed by the love of Jesus? What if today you thought of religion as observance and you walked out transformed and amazed by the relationship of the grace of the person of the risen Jesus? You see, I believe that's why God brought you here today. And we're going to be looking at this account in the Bible of a woman named Mary Magdalene. And she has this encounter with the risen Jesus. And as a result, there's this profound sense of hope and healing in her life. And may God bring that profound hope and healing in your life here today too, with Easter. So I'm going to be reading from a chapter from the Gospel of John, chapter 20, verses 11 through 18. And if you could follow along as I read it, I'm reading from verse 11 on. So what's going on? Mary is grieving because the Jesus whom she loved was crucified. And so on this Sunday morning, she goes to the tomb and she sees it being empty. And she's thinking someone has taken the body of Jesus. And so she's grieving what's happening. And let's read what John tells us. But Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. And she saw two angels in white sitting where the body of Jesus had lain, one at the head and one at the feet. And they said to her, "Woman, Why are you weeping? By the way, woman's not pejorative. It's kind of like, ma'am, is everything okay? Why are you weeping? She said to them, they have taken away my Lord, and I do not know where they have laid him. Having said this, she turned around and saw Jesus standing, but she did not know that it was Jesus. Jesus said to her, woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you seeking? Supposing him to be the gardener, she said to him, sir, if you have carried him away, tell me where you have laid him, and I will take him away. And Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. Jesus said to her, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Mary Magdalene went and announced to the disciples, I have seen the Lord, and that he had said these things to her. And this is God's word. And so for the next few minutes, we're going to be looking at just Easter and the message of Easter, what that means for you and for me today as we look at this passage. Let me share briefly 3 thoughts with you. And here's the first one. The first is this, that Easter turns what is natural in our broken world, loss, pain, and suffering, on its head. It turns what is natural in our broken world, and it turns it upside down on its head. So let me read a couple of verses just to highlight again. I didn't read this one in the beginning of this chapter in verse 1. You see, it's Good Friday. Jesus was crucified. It was followed by Silent Saturday because it was the day of Sabbath, no work. And now it's Easter morning. And so Mary goes to the tomb. And it says here, now on the first day of the week, Mary Magdalene came to the tomb early while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been taken away from the tomb. And verse 11, and Mary stood weeping outside the tomb. And as she wept, she stooped to look into the tomb. Now, what's happening with Mary is something that's very natural, is it not? She's grieving. She's lost someone that she's deeply loved. And she goes to this tomb in the morning because she's still experiencing trauma of seeing Jesus crucified on the cross. And there was no moment for her to say goodbye, to make it personal. So she comes to the tomb early to grieve, to say her goodbyes, to pay her respect. And you know, as you listen to that, you nod your head and go, you know what, I've done that too. That's completely natural. In a broken world of loss and pain, we grieve. And so listen to this next quote from Barbara Brown Taylor. She says this, when a human being goes into the ground, that is that. You do not wait around for the person to reappear so you can pick up where you left off. Not on this side of the grave, anyway. You say goodbye. You pay your respects and you go on with your life as best as you can, knowing that the only place springtime happens in a cemetery is on the graves, not in them. We know that to be true. And some of you are here this morning and you've experienced a form of death, a death of a loved one, a death of a dream, death of broken relationships, just a lot of brokenness in a naturally broken world of pain, loss, and grieving. And the way you often move forward is you just kind of often put one step out after another, and you just hunker down and say, you know what, I just got to get through this. That's natural for us to experience. But Easter is something that's so unique because, friends, this is what it means. It's the breaking in of the unnatural, of the supernatural into the natural. Because the message of Easter declares to us that Jesus Christ died and he rose again. And he conquered the grave. He destroyed and crushed evil and death. And he's making all things new. He's taking all things that are broken and he's going to make all things new. And the basis of all this is the certainty of the resurrection. Not as a symbol, not as a metaphor, but the historical truth and reality of it, friends. Earlier on this week, there was a little video recording that came out online. You could look it up. And it was from a couple, Tim and Kathy Keller. Tim is the founding pastor of Redeemer Presbyterian Church in New York. And they're talking about the resurrection. I'm going to summarize some of the points that they discuss. They mention how, isn't there great irony in the 21st century here today? The great irony is that, of all things, it's the Christian church. It's Christianity that makes an emphasis on facts and truth that can be verified. Because you see, we live in a culture today. Our culture here today basically says people cannot trust in facts. You make up your own facts. You make up your own truth. What is true and right and what feels right to you. And as a result, there's no sense of having the right take and agreement on what reality means. And it leads to a lot of skepticism. It leads to a lot of mistrust. You can't trust what media has to say. You can't trust institutions. You can't trust the government. You can't trust organizations. And so it leads to a lot of unease. And isn't there a great sense of irony that in the 21st century, it's the Christian faith, it's the church that says, hey, you know what? Facts matter. Truth really matters. Historical truth matters, and it can be verified. And we want to encourage you to look into it for veracity. And Kathy Keller, in that recording, she references an article that she gave a while back on the resurrection. The emphasis on trust, but accountability. Verify. Trust, but verify. And she references how, decades ago when the superpowers in our world talked about nuclear disarmament. Let's ramp out all the nuclear arsenal. And as they agreed to do that, they agreed on the idea of trusting one another. But not just trusting that you're going to do that, but verifying it, providing that, are you really doing that? And the reason why she shares that is because here's what you need to know about Christianity. Kathy Keller said, God worked it out so that we didn't have to take the resurrection just on trust, but he actually made it verifiable. You see, the message of Easter is that Jesus Christ died and he rose again. It's not, hey, you just trust that. But Christianity says, you know what? You can verify it. You can check it out into history. And one of the examples that she gives is the account that we just read of the angel there. And the angel removed the stone away, and the body is missing. Jesus is gone. As Kathy Keller said, Elvis has left the building, right? And here's what she says that I thought was so profound, friends. The stone was rolled away, not to let Jesus out, but to let us in. Not to let Jesus out, but to let us in, to not only trust, but to verify that the resurrection had taken place in time and place in history. Have you thought about that? You see, Jesus, when he's inside the tomb, he wasn't knocking and saying, hey, let me out. I got people to meet. I got to show up to people. Hey, can you remove this stone? Jesus is the Lord God Almighty. He doesn't need an angel to roll the stone away from him. If he created all things, Christianity says, he can go right through it. He could push it away. He could talk and it'll just be gone. Why then does the angel remove that stone? Not to let Jesus out, but to let you and me in. Why? But to tell us that the resurrection, it happened and you can verify it. That's why this happened. And we're told of this time and time again to understand Christianity. John, how do you know? Where's the verification on that? Well, he records Mary that we just read in our passage as the first eyewitness. No one would make that up because in Jesus' day, women eyewitnesses were considered invalid as a testimony in court. You don't do that unless it was an eyewitness that occurred. So people were saying, what? Why would you want that? That can't be trusted. Because John's saying, because it happened. I spoke with her. Go talk to her. Verify. Also, John records Mary confusing Jesus to be a gardener? Like, what is that? Because in the Jewish worldview, if you were to make something up and the Messiah died and rose again, you look at the Old Testament and you would expect Jesus to be in glorious, radiant light and awe, and you would be terrified. Who in the right mind would say, oh, Jesus, I'm sorry, I thought you were a gardener? Nobody says that, would make that up, unless it was an eyewitness account. Mary, did you really think he was a gardener? Yeah. Why? Verify. The Apostle Paul in 1 Corinthians says that over 500 people saw the risen Lord and are still alive. He says they're still alive right now. He wrote this about 25 years after the death of Jesus and the resurrection. He says, go talk to them. Now, Why? Here's a question then that you might be wondering. Why does it matter that the resurrection of Christ happened in time and place in history? Why does that matter so much? Well, here it is, friends. Every major religion will say that you are saved by the teachings of the founder. That by obeying the teachings of the founder, that's the way salvation comes around. Christianity says you are not saved by the teachings of the founder, but you are saved by his life. And his life happened in history. It's provable. It's verifiable. It happened. You're saved by not his teaching, but by his life. That's why it matters, friends. By his death and his resurrection, by that power and that reality, that's the basis in which salvation comes. So if the resurrection is just symbol or metaphor, this is what Paul says in 1 Corinthians. And if Christ has not been raised, then our preaching is in vain and your faith is in vain. And if Christ has not been raised, your faith is futile and you're still in your sins. If in Christ we have hope in this life only, we are of all people most to be pitied. Paul says, hey, look, if Jesus Christ didn't rise again and it didn't happen in reality, then Christianity is a sham. It falls. Your faith is in vain. All that was said by Jesus, none of it. It has no significance whatsoever. And yet the opposite side of it all is this. If the resurrection of Christ happened in time and place and history, for one thing, you can have certainty. Now, let me explain this, friends. How can you be certain that with all the evil and the shootings and the violence and war taking place in this world, how can you be certain in the midst of all of that God will one day make all things new? How can you be certain that with all the sense of failure and shame and the mistakes that you carry, that you don't want anyone to know that God is not going to abandon and dismiss you? How can you know that when you encounter and face death, that is not the end? The reality of the resurrection. Because Jesus died and rose again. He says, because of me, you trust in me, I'm making all things new. All things will be made right. Then you can deal with all the brokenness, loss, and death because of the certainty behind it. I read and came across a tweet from a religious professor. And this religious professor said this. I don't have it up here on the screen, but basically said this. The resurrection, you can believe in the resurrection, that it happened, and it doesn't have to necessarily mean the bodily resurrection is true. And this person said, faith is more than adherence to a rigid dogma. Resurrection doesn't mean just bodily resurrection. Now, let me give you a response to this. One, when this person says, faith is more than adherence to a rigid dogma, I want you to know that her statement is a rigid dogma. Because everyone has a dogma behind it all, right? But here's the problem with that. If the resurrection is just, you don't have to believe in the reality of it in history, it's just metaphor for you, you could just believe in that, then what's the basis? You have no certainty behind it. There's no certainty behind it, so it's basically saying, I just wish for the resurrection. I just hope that it's going to happen. It's sort of like fairy tale pixie dust. And that's why for some of you friends, you have a problem with Christianity. Because you think Christianity is simply a resurrection by metaphor. Hey, just believe in those things. And man, I don't want to be thinking those silly things. And I want you to see that Christianity doesn't either. Because the Christian faith emphasizes and pushes, hey, you can trust in this and verify it. That's the basis of the resurrection. And because of it, you can have certainty, friends. Certainty. Not only that, you can have hope. Because you have hope for the future. Jesus Christ, he died, he rose again. He will make all things new. It happened in history. And you have not only hope for the future, hope from the future. Because he's going to come back and make all things new in time, in history. You and I can engage in the mission of moving forward in making all things new as well. So that's the first point. Now let's look at the second thought for us to consider from our passage. The resurrected Jesus comes to address your tears and deepest longings and calls you by name. In verse 15, Jesus said to her, "Woman, why are you weeping? Whom are you searching?" And I love this. I love that Jesus, who's resurrected, doesn't go to her who's weeping and says, "Hey, stop crying. I'm here. Stop crying. Don't worry." But Jesus is so gentle, and he engages her heart. He engages, he cares, he engages her brokenness, her pain, and her sorrows. And in the same way, friends, the risen Jesus cares about you and engages your crushed hopes and dreams too. There's a book that came out by Dan Allender that I'm going through. It's called Redeeming Heartache. And in the book, I'm making my way through it, so where I am in the book, all of us carry heartache. All of us carry these deep wounds from early ages of heartache. And it could be something massive that you experience trauma, or it could be trauma just from something that seems minor, but it's impressed in your mind, in your heart. And the result of these heartaches, it leads to fragmentation. That we have a hard time even articulating our brokenness when we tell about it to people. We have a hard time processing it. It leads to isolation because of the deep shame of the heartache and the trauma. We don't want to tell people, and it also leads to disassociation. Because I've been so wounded and so hurt by this, I don't want to deal with this, so I'm going to put all my effort in work. I'm going to go in, I'm going to drink. I'm going to turn to something else. And you and I know that if you stuff that in and avoid it, it doesn't go well for you. But the pathway to heal is you need someone from the outside. You need to be safe. You need to be understood. You need like a counselor or a love person to listen in. And in that environment to process, to not hold it in, but to let it out and to heal. And I love that's what Jesus does. He comes to you and says, "Why are you weeping? What are you longing for?" And he engages your heart. That this morning, the risen Jesus comes to you, engages your heart, and perhaps this is a day in which you can begin that journey of recovery and hope. One of the things that I do in my prayer life is that I have in my phone an alarm at 1 p.m. And when the alarm goes up, it's a reminder for me. I do this thing called the prayer of examine. And one of the prayers of examine that I'll reflect on, and you feel free to do this yourself, is the questions that I respond and I talk to the risen Jesus about. The questions are, what am I mad about? What am I sad about? What am I anxious about? What am I glad about? And I just end up having a conversation with Jesus. Lord, I'm not going to stuff these things in. And I'm going to give to you these matters because in my pain and trauma, I'm not meant to carry that burden. You are the risen Lord who comes to heal, and you engage my heart. And friends, that's what Jesus comes to do, to engage you in your heart and brokenness. But not only that, notice in verse 16, Jesus said to her, Mary. The risen Jesus calls you by name. Mary, I see you. I see what you're going. I see you. And I don't know about you, but let me just say this because I know this is true of me. You have all these names that you hold on to yourself or what someone has said to you with a lot of brokenness. Ugly, stupid, not good enough, irredeemable, incompetent, failure. And what I want you to see with Easter is that the risen Jesus comes, and the name above all names, Jesus, calls you by name and gives you dignity. And he gives you healing. And he calls you by name to say, I'm calling you. I will not dismiss you. I will never forget you. Because I have come to make all things new. And I'm calling you by name because I'm here to make all things new in you. I am the risen Lord who is alive. And I have come to make you alive. And when you hear Jesus calling your name, oh, friends, it's a wonderful thing. Hear his name calling your name in Easter. Third and final, Easter enables you to let go and to move forward. So in verses 16 and 17, Jesus said to her, Mary. She turned and said to him in Aramaic, Rabboni, which means teacher. And Jesus said to her, do not cling to me, for I have not yet ascended to the Father, but go to my brothers and say to them, I am ascending to my Father and your Father, to my God and your God. Why is Jesus saying, do not cling to me? Mary realizes Jesus is here. Jesus, and she holds on, and Jesus says, do not cling to me. And the reason why is this. Mary, in that moment, saw the risen Jesus and is holding on to him because in her heart she's saying, I want to go back to the way things were. I'm clinging on to you. I am out of fear. I cannot move forward. Jesus, you're here. Let's go back to the way things were. Remember those days when before all this crazy stuff happened? I'm holding on to you. I'm afraid to move forward, and I'm just going to be. Those were the good moments. Let's go back to that. And Jesus says, no. Don't hold on. Because I'm not calling you to be stuck in fear. I'm not calling you to just go back to nostalgia and be in the safe place. Oh, remember those days. But I am the risen Lord. And I'm calling you to life. And I'm calling you to mission. And I'm calling you to move forward in the freedom and the journey of pressing on to bring my kingdom come into your life and into the life of others in this world. That is profound, friends. Perhaps today is the day where Jesus is giving you a vision for a new beginnings, not erasing your pain and sorrow, but redeeming it. And maybe for some of you, you need to hear this. You don't need to hold on anymore. The risen Lord says, I got you. Follow me. Follow me to life. So listen to this quote, third and final quote from Barbara Brown Taylor as I wrap things up. It's a little bit of a longer quote, but it is so profound. Jesus was not on his way back to Mary and the others. He was on his way to God, and he was taking the whole world with him. This may be why all the other gospel accounts of the resurrection tell us not to be afraid, because new life is frightening. It's unnatural. To expect a sealed tomb and find one filled with angels, to hunt the past and discover the future, to seek a corpse and find the risen Lord, none of this is natural. Death is natural. Loss is natural. Grief is natural. But those stones have been rolled away this happy morning to reveal the highly unnatural truth. By the light of this day, God has planted a seed of life in us that cannot be killed. And if we can remember that, then there is nothing we cannot do. Move mountains, banish fear, love our enemies, change the world. The only thing we cannot do is hold on to him. He has asked us, please not to do that, because he knows that all in all, we would rather keep him with us where we are than let him take us where he is going. Better, we should let him hold on to us, perhaps. Better, we should let him take us into the white-hot presence of God, who is not behind us, but ahead of us every step of the way. My dear friends, Easter, Jesus Christ died and he rose again. And when you put your trust in him, he says, let's go. Let's go. It's time to move forward. Follow me into the presence of God, into freedom and joy. So as I wrap up this message with Easter, this day of great joy, the Super Bowl of Sundays, what does it mean for you? And maybe for some of you here today, as you're listening to this, your heart is intrigued. Because as you think about culture and how you can't trust in facts, man. You can't trust and verify these things. There's no sense of truth. And your heart is intrigued by hearing that Jesus and the Christian story talks about trusting but verifying it. And maybe you're here today and you're saying, you know what? That's for me. That's what I want. And Jesus invites you into that. And maybe you're here this morning, your heart is stirred because of all these different names that have wounded you for so long, and you're afraid to go there. And your heart is stirred because Jesus, the risen Lord, comes to you and says, I'm calling your name. I'm engaging your heart. You don't need to hide. You don't need to hold back. And your heart is stirred and you're saying, Jesus, I'm ready. I'm not going 80% in, I'm going 100%. You are everything to me. And maybe just today, maybe, you walked in here thinking, I didn't expect or think much about what Easter would mean. And you walk out of here transformed in the freedom and the joy that you now have because Jesus Christ, he came into this world, he died, and he was raised for you. Amen. Will you pray with me?